welcome back to the Halo series. My name is Douglas Brown, CEO at Halo Consulting. Today we are joined by Jay Graves, CEO from Pathfinder Business Consultants. Today we are excited to announce our inaugural Halo series featuring Jay Graves, where we will discuss creating a sustainable culture of DEI across a 3-part mini-series. Jay, great to have you join us today.
Hey, so happy to be here. Thank you. Love it. Huge crowd.
Before we dive into the questions, Jay, I have to ask, have you finished all your holiday shopping?
I think I have 1 or 2 more things I'm waiting for from Amazon. Hopefully the weather hasn't impacted it too much, but yeah, I should be all set. My wife's birthday is the 27th, so I'm not allowed to combine the two. So if I do get something that's delayed, it'll just become don't tell my wife this, but it'll become a birthday present. So there's some flexibility.
Well, happy early birthday to your wife. And we can save the rest of the holiday conversation for later. So let's get started with you, Jay. Can you share with our viewers your journey and how you've matriculated to founding Pathfinder Business Consultants?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So first of all, thanks for having me and allowing me to share my journey and hopefully some, really important information that can help people, as they're going through their DEI journey within their own organizations. But for me, I will say that, I'm not somebody who went to school for this or have a degree in diversity, equity, and inclusion. This really started with my life, where I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, and in Greensboro, as you can see in this picture, this actually happened in Greensboro, where I grew up. There was a lot of start of the social movement in the 60s in that area. And the reason being is because Jim Crow was incredibly enforced in that area. And this picture is a picture of a place called Woolworths. And if you think of a diner and a CVS coming together, that's basically what a Woolworths was. And at the time, in the late 60s when this happened, African Americans were allowed to shop in a store, but they couldn't sit at the counter and they couldn't eat the food. And there's a historically black college down the road, and some of the students said, you know what, this isn't right. If our money is good enough for the store, it should be good. We should be good enough to be able to sit at this counter. And so they started staging what are called sit-ins. And this actually started sit-ins across the entire nation from this. And unfortunately for these individuals, as you can see, they were surrounded, they were harassed, government officials, police came and harassed them. If anybody's ever interested and they want to see something on this, you can definitely see what these individuals went through. But it was pretty dramatic. But they stuck to it. And actually that started a very large social movement in that area. And if you fast forward to, finally the laws were changed, right? But when I was born in the early 70s, there was still an unwritten rule in the area that was around Jim Crow. And I didn't really realize that being young, but, other than what my parents told me. But this picture here is a picture of me when I was in the 2nd grade. And that's where racism really, truly hit me for the first time. I was in the 2nd grade, and this kid was shooting spitballs at me, right? As kids will do. And finally I got tired of it, and I pushed him, and he fell out of his chair, and he looked at me and he said, "Get your hands off of me, you nigger." And that was the first time that I ever heard that word towards me specifically. And that's the first time I realized that people were judging me or looking at me solely on my looks. And the teacher, of course, came over and instead of that kid getting in trouble, she grabbed me and she started pulling me to the principal's office. And I said, "Well, he called me this bad word. He was spitting spitballs at me." And she said, "Well, if your parents weren't illegally married, then you wouldn't be dealing with this." And that goes back to this kind of history of Jim Crow. My parents are interracial. My dad's black and my mom's white. And at the time, that was looked upon as race mixing and one of the worst things you could possibly do in society. And so I got pulled to the principal's office. The principal agreed with the teacher, and I actually got sent home. I got in trouble. And I was really fearful because I thought at that point my parents truly were illegally married. And so I got in trouble at home because I didn't tell them what happened. I basically just said, yeah, I was fighting, but I was so worried that I got my parents in trouble, that I was going to cause them to be put in jail and everything else. And of course, we eventually talked through everything. But this is when it really struck me, at such a young age, that I would be judged differently, just by based on who I am, and so that I carried that through, to this day, right? That's something that people talk about, traumas and talk about baggage that happens in their life, and that's one that I've certainly dealt with, but it's something that stuck with me from that point on. And I have to admit that I really went into kind of a protection mode, and almost almost an aggressive mode to just protect myself, because I thought that I was going to be singled out for just being different. And interestingly enough, with my family, on my mom's side of the family, my grandfather, who's pictured here, grew up in an incredibly racist, community. It was heavy Klan. There were connections with my great grandfather in the Klan. He was actually high up in the Klan, and this was in Indiana. And so when my parents got married, he disowned my mom and basically wanted nothing to do with the family. And I didn't even know this until I was older. But a lesson that I learned from my granddad was that people can change. And what I really learned from him is something that he taught me when I was 12 years old. He pulled me aside, and he was really choked up, and he was in tears. And he said, "I just have to tell you about our history." And he went into how he grew up in this racist society. And even when he was in World War II, he was a radar tech, and he was told, black people can't come to this part of the deck. You don't have to worry about them being here. They're just going to serve food. When he came back from the war, he saw the riots and everything else. So everything that was imprinted on him was, black people are inferior and they're aggressive. And so that's what he thought when my parents got married. When I was born, my grandmother decided, hey, I'm going to go see my grandchild. And he said, you're not going down without me. So he begrudgingly came down. And he said that when he saw me as a little baby and he saw how much my mom and dad loved each other, he said, I was struck by the fact that I know that this baby's going to have to deal with people like me. And he said, from that day forward, he really, really changed how he thought. And he said it took time, because he went back to that community. But as we then visited him in Indiana, he saw us getting harassed, and he started to really speak out against his neighbors, around racism and how it was wrong and how they needed to stop doing what they were doing. This picture of us is clearly, many, many years later. And what I learned from him is people can change. Sometimes they come from an area. We talk a lot about unconscious biases and your community and things like that really shape who you are. But what I learned from him is that no matter how much hate or that you come from, you can change. And that really inspired me. And it's one of the reasons why I started Pathfinder, why I went down this journey of helping break this mold with other individuals and organizations as well. Probably the biggest thing, where I saw diversity in action was when I went to the military. So I went to college, graduated college, and I got a commission as an intelligence officer. And when I joined my unit, one of the things that I saw is that we had people from all kinds of backgrounds, different socioeconomic, gender, racial, cultural, you name it, just complete, just beautiful spectrum of different humans coming together. And what I found is that, through the military, you have a very strong mission and purpose. And that mission and purpose superseded a lot of the issues that we faced when it came to racism and diversity and things like that. Not to say that there weren't issues with racism. During the time that I was in, we had Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But there was actually a very large contingent of soldiers who felt like that was wrong, that people should be themselves as long as they're willing to serve and as long as they're purpose driven. Then we are all just human beings, faced towards, one common goal. And that really impacted me as well, where I saw that we can break through these social, stereotypes and all the other things that we were facing. And we had very open conversations. People they assumed that I was rich, right? Because I was an officer. And so I talked about you know, I didn't come from that type of background. I was actually homeless for a time, right? I came from a very poor background, and that got them thinking, oh, okay, well, I can't judge people just by their title or what I think of them. And, so we had these very open conversations around where you came from, what's your journey, and what got you here, and then how we collectively come together. And eventually I moved from the military into corporate. And when I moved into corporate, I started off as a pharmaceutical sales rep, but I quickly moved into leadership because of my leadership background, and it was something that I aspired to do. And I was known as somebody who could turn teams around quickly, particularly underperforming teams. And one time somebody asked me, they said, how do you do this? Where are you finding success in this? And I said, well, it's all about people. It's all about the culture that I bring together, but I like to bring together diverse individuals, and I like to understand their journey, and I like to understand how they can bring their experiences together in a way that makes us a really powerful team. And from that day on, we really started working in that company that I was at. We really started working on infusing diversity, equity, inclusion into our people strategy, so to speak. And we saw results across the board, very positive results across the board as we went through that journey. I did a lot of talks on the side. I was still very passionate about this, and as I was learning more from DEI consultants and going through the process of building out a program myself, I started to share those best practices with different companies. And my wife pulled me aside one day and she said, you're so excited when you get done having these talks, or you're so excited when you have these breakthrough moments with these organizations. You're a VP, you're high up. I know that you're very successful here, but I see that your passion lies here. And she was right. And so we started working on a plan to create Pathfinder as a way to help organizations, really thrive and have a sustainable culture of DEI within their organization and realize the results from that.
Jay,
That's the journey we're on today. Yeah.
yeah, thanks for sharing your journey, Jay, and really appreciate your service as well in the military. With your professional and personal experience as a diversity leader and CEO at Pathfinder Business Consultants, what are the things keeping you up at night?
Yeah, there's three things that keep me up at night around this, and I will say the first is the politicization of diversity, equity, inclusion. Over the past couple of years, more and more organizations realize that this is a journey that they need to take as an organization, and it's also become incredibly divisive over the years as well. And I think there's just a whole lot of misinformation out there. I think that when you once this became very politicized and it became something in the media, it started to really derail the authentic conversation around what is diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is really just us seeing each other as humans, understanding that everybody has a different journey, no matter what you look like or sound like or where you come from, but that we need to respect those journeys, understand those journeys, and meet people where they are and help them succeed and progress, right? Today, I think about it, the latest thing is woke culture, right? That's something that growing up, on the African side, American side of my family, they use that term and it wasn't a negative term, like my mom being white. I remember my, relatives would say like, oh yeah, she's woke, right? She gets it. She doesn't see us for color or anything like that. She's really, embraced the culture and the things that make us different. And now when you listen to woke today, and I listen to these conversations, I'm like, gosh, they have skewed that so incredibly far. It's that's not the meaning, but they've taken it and they've just really, demonized it. And that's something that I think creates more division than anything. Um, the other thing that keeps me up is that I definitely see that we're facing DEI fatigue because it is something that is constantly in the media. It's something constantly in social media. It's something that individuals like myself, we're approaching organizations to talk about it. And there's a lot of people that I run into that just say like, gosh, I'm just so tired of this conversation. And a lot of my colleagues that I talk to say they're facing the same thing, this kind of DEI fatigue, because when you do these programs, it is a journey. It is something that's not a check the box in a couple of months. Clients that I've had these clients for several years. We're still on the journey. We continue to grow, but it's something that you have to be in for the long haul. And there is sometimes this fatigue that comes about. And the third thing is, in times where there's economic uncertainty, we're in a recession or heading towards one of the things that organizations start to cut, and they're probably, I'd argue, are already underfunded anyway or under resourced, is their people strategy. And of course, DEI falls into people strategy. So, my concern is that, we're gonna start to cut our people strategy going forward and not really think about our culture and not really think about our people. And that's just so short-sighted right now. Really what you need the power of a diverse group. You need the power of open-minded and leaders, and you need a culture that's accepting and motivating, during these times more than ever, because these are the people and the groups that are going to lead you through the challenges that organizations face in economic uncertainty. So those would be the things that keep me up at night.
Jay, thanks for sharing. And what I'll say is that there are a lot of things that are keeping me up at night, but most importantly, I am trying to get more sleep. So I don't want to I don't want to detract from your podcast by any means. So we'll continue to move on here. So prior to discussing what you've built at Pathfinder Business Consultants, can you share with our viewers the importance of connecting the business strategy to a people strategy?
Absolutely. So a lot of organizations will spend a lot of time and resources and energy around their overall corporate business strategy. And that's the one area that they tend to have resourced, in some ways, maybe even over resourced. What I see as a lack of connection is that same type of resourcing and attention in the people strategy. And what I mean by people strategy is thinking about your corporate and even your team culture. Corporations may have their culture, but really, when you get down to it, in the areas that I find in the work that I do that are the most critical, is that frontline manager or that frontline team. And so those teams also have their own culture, right? It might be under the umbrella of a corporate culture, but teams have their own culture. Diversity, equity, inclusion, of course, is an important piece of that. Leadership development, just whether that's just classic leadership development to make sure that you're supporting your leaders and growing your leaders, is a critical piece. And then that employee engagement, what are we doing for the employees? What are we doing to support the employees in their own pathway, whatever that may be? And ultimately, if you do this well and you keep your eye on this and you resource it properly and you make this just as important as your business strategy, then you're ultimately going to have better results. But like, kind of going back to what keeps me up at night, is this tends to be the part that people, a lot of times when I find when I go into an organization, they're not really focused on this area. Or if they are, it's just at the surface and they're not taking a deep enough dive. And the important thing for me on the people strategy is that diversity, equity, inclusion. And the reason being is because if you use this as your filter, you will make sure that your culture is inclusive, that your team culture is inclusive, that people feel like they belong there, and they're very much rallied behind that mission and that purpose. But if you don't do that through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, you might be doing it through a completely different lens, and you might actually be ostracizing other individuals within your organization. Same thing with the leadership development. If you're focused on, just a certain group of leaders, or, a lot of times in an organization, it's unconscious, but we like to hire people that look and act and share the same interests as us, right? So those people may get more of the resources or more of the support. Well, if you haven't infused that lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, then you may be giving advantages to one group and not another. And the same thing for your employees. If you're not thinking of them as your employee base as a unique and diverse group, then again, you may fall really short on that inclusion and belonging aspect of things. So that to me is the glue for making sure that you have a very good people strategy.
Thanks for that overview, Jay. And from my perspective, it's definitely critical for executives to connect the business strategy to the people strategy more than ever now with this ever-changing landscape that we call the new norm. Communication between HR and senior leadership is critical to achieving the organization's mission. In particular, the importance of a strong company culture should continue to be at the forefront of executives. According to a recent article published by Forbes, a strong culture that fosters teamwork, community, and inclusivity increases engagement exponentially. So, companies with a robust culture have up to a 72% higher employee engagement than those whose cultures are misaligned or need improvement.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So, Jay, from your perspective, can you define what is diversity, equity, and inclusion for our viewers?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I like to do whenever I'm kicking off with an organization or doing a workshop with people. Is just level setting on a definition because again, there are so many different viewpoints out there, and this just creates a really good common framework and vernacular for people to go off. So for diversity, really, it's what makes each of us unique. It includes our background and our life experiences and our beliefs and a lot of people when they first are engaging with me, it's well, we need more women, or we need people of color, or we need people this ethnicity or whatever, in our workforce. And I'll say let's back up for a second. Let's talk about the other things that make us very different that fall under the umbrella of diversity. Whether that's enabling those of us who have disabilities, those of us who come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, and all those other experiences that make us unique. And so for me, that is what diversity is.
Thanks for that overview, Jay. So, diversity to me is recognizing that a group of people come together from different racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, and culture backgrounds and various lifestyles, experiences, and interests. Diversity does include a range of ideas, perspectives, and values represented across the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
Jay, what are your thoughts on equity?
Yeah, equity is really, I look at this as being fairness, recognizing that we all don't start from the same place. And so there is I like to link back to this video that I saw. I think it was about 2 years ago, and it really, really solidified this for me. There was I don't know if you've seen this, but there are people from different backgrounds lined up on a line, and there's an individual standing in front of them, and he starts asking questions. If you have a parent who went to college, take a step forward. If you have, if you come from middle class or higher, step forward, or and it's just kind of all these different, diverse socioeconomic, background type questions. And as they're going across the field, you can see that there's a smatter, there's a distance, right? Between groups. And so when
Mm-hmm.
I think of equity, I think about, and again, this goes back to, and this is where things, can get confusing for people. DEI is not like anti-white or anti-white male or anything like that, right? But there were more, white males at the front of the group, right? Less women. Women were kind of behind them, and then you had, more, people of color and different groups behind them. And it's really just understanding that, somebody like myself who, his family didn't have a college background. I was the first to go to college. Um, you know, we sometimes got off the starting line a little bit behind, and we had to find ways to try to speed up or catch up. And so thinking through the lens of equity just really understands that we need to be fair. If there's somebody that's maybe in your leadership pipeline, but they haven't come from a lot they haven't had a lot of resources in their lives, and they haven't been able to take advantage of maybe additional education or programs or different things. Let's make sure that we put that in place for them, right? That we give them those experiences to be able to get to an equal playing field, and so that it's fair that when we're sitting in there behind our closed doors as leaders as we will, and we're starting to look at our pipeline and we're starting to look at who we're promoting, that we've given everybody an equal shake at that opportunity.
That was really well said, Jay. And when I think of equity, it's really the ongoing process which requires us as individuals to identify and overcome intentional and unintentional barriers arising from bias or systematic
Mm.
structures.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I mean, this is definitely where you'll start to see the bias come in play, and across the board. That's this is typically where you'll start to see it.
All right, let's move on to the inclusion, Jay. How do you define inclusion?
Yeah, inclusion really is just ensuring that everybody feels valued and respected as an individual. So, When I look at truly inclusive cultures, and there are clients that I work with that have done a really great job at this. People truly understand that they're included. Done a good job of having ERGs, employee resource groups, or groups that they can be a part of, whether they're part of that group or they want to learn more about that group. And that really creates just this openness where everybody understands that they have a voice and that they're respected as an individual and that we understand their different journeys and and treat them accordingly.
Inclusion in BJ is really the ongoing and continued effort ensuring that diverse people with different identities have the ability to be involved and fully participate in all aspects of the organization, including senior leadership and the decision-making process.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I think about here, I love that definition, Douglas, is you know, if you're not able to speak up and you feel like you can't speak up, then you are leaving so much great human capital on the table.
Hmm.
And an organization should want to hear from people because of the different backgrounds that we have and the different experiences. We can bring those viewpoints to that organization. But if you don't have that psychological safety, you don't have that ability to speak up, then you're not going to realize people's full potential or their input.
And and lastly, let's cover belonging.
Yeah, so belonging is something that really has been talked about over the last couple of years or most recent years, and it goes a step beyond inclusion, and it's really feeling of security and support when you're there is truly a sense of acceptance, inclusion, and identity for a member of a certain group. So it really is just taking things a step further from inclusion, where I might have, say, an employee resource group, as a veteran, right? I might be able to be on an employee resource group as a veteran, but do I really feel like I belong in that organization? Do I really feel like I belong a part of the greater team, or do I just belong with my little sphere within that group? If you only belong in that one little sphere, then you don't truly have cultural belonging. When you can break that to where you have belonging across the organization, then that's where you really start to have a powerful, powerful DEI program and culture.
Yeah, my perspective in belonging is very similar to yours, Jay, and where it's really the ability for organizations to make their employees feel welcomed and for those to feel welcome exactly as they are.
Hmm.
All right, let's move on to the next slide. So, Jay, when you're connecting with executives and business leaders looking to improve their DEI strategy, how do you go about presenting the business case for diversity?
Yeah, this is a lot of times when I'm talking with the C-suite or business leaders where they want to default to, right? They understand that diversity is important, but they want to understand the business case. And what's interesting about this is that the business case has been out there for a long time. It really started with a McKinsey study years ago. But I found a couple of resources that I tend to show to these individuals that are really compelling business cases. So, according to various research, diverse companies and teams they will outperform industry norms by 35%. And this is found in McKinsey. Uh, they have 19% higher revenue. This is reported by Boston Consulting Group. They're 1.7 times more likely to be innovative leaders in their market. And this is according to Josh Breslin's study. And then 70% more likely to capture new markets. And this is from the Harvard Business Review. And so a lot of the corporate strategic leaders, when they see this, the question I ask of them is, would your business be more successful if you were able to have these types of results, even a portion of these types of results? And it's always a resounding yes. Why would you not want to be more innovative? Why would you not want to drive more revenue? Why would you not want to be able to move into a different market, successfully? And if you have a diverse group, then you're able to do that a whole lot better than if you're more of an autonomous group. And so this gets a lot of buy-in at this point for the business case of diversity. And a lot of times, what's interesting is these corporate leaders will start to read back to me situations where they've tried different things and they've failed. So, for example, I had one that was telling me one time about their marketing department wasn't very diverse, and they were trying to move into a more diverse market from an age perspective. And they didn't have anybody from that generation within their marketing department, and so they they really missed the mark pretty critically, and spent a lot of money going back to that, business strategy and the importance of a people strategy. They spent a lot of money on that corporate strategy, and it failed. And so we really grew around and dug on that. What would it look like differently if you had people within your organization from that particular age group, that generation, informing your strategy? And we agreed it probably would have succeeded.
Thanks for sharing that example with our viewers, Jay. So we're going to move on to DEI program development, and with this as our first Halo mini-series, this episode is unique, and in episodes 2 and 3, we will take a deep dive into the step-by-step DEI program development process. And for now, Jay, can you briefly touch on each step of the process?
Absolutely. And what I hope to get out of the series for individuals who attend is we'll go through this framework, but as you said, we'll take a deeper dive. Realistically, you should be able to walk away from this framework. It's a proven framework. It's the framework that we use. And you should be able to walk away and have really, really solid framework for how to implement a DEI program. And so those details that I'll provide in the coming sessions will be really critical. But the first place that I always tell people to start is with governance. And by governance, what I mean there is, a DEI steering committee. Sometimes what I run into is, they'll pick somebody, typically a minority from the organization, and maybe they're like a manager or above position, and they'll say, "We need a DEI program. Can you reach out to other, diverse individuals and start a program?" And if you're starting at a grassroots, that might work. Sometimes people find that offensive that, you just sought out the minority in the group and said, do this. And so this can derail things from the beginning. So what we talk about in governance is that's got to be top down. That has to be your top corporate leader. If you have a board, maybe a board member that's on that committee as well, and have the key leaders as a part of this, have the key leaders have a real stake in the overall program, and oversight and monitoring and everything else that we're going to kind of go into, that they're very, very close to this and they're supporting it, and that they have a very, very strong voice for the organization around the importance of DE&I.
Thanks, Jay. And then after governance, the next step is assessment?
Yeah, next step is assessment. And so this is something where we really recommend that you do an organizational survey, that you hear the good, bad, and the ugly from your employees, because a lot of times what I'll find is people will make assumptions. They may look at their metrics and they'll say, well, we don't have enough women across, our leadership ranks, or we don't have enough this or enough that, or our population here. But they're making guesses. And what I find there is we all carry our own biases, right? But this is another area where sometimes those biases come into play, where somebody may say, these are the things that I think are going wrong, or where we need DEI in our organization, and then they'll launch into a program. And if you launch into the program without hearing from your people, it's a huge misstep. And so that's why we always make sure that we do an assessment, that we do a really deep dive in this assessment, and we understand what are those friction points so that we can address them early as we're building out our next step, which is strategy. And the strategy piece is where we take all of these inputs together. For us, with our clients, we'll do not only just a normal, assessment. We have an assessment tool that we do that's very, very thorough. But we also will do interviews with individuals, one-on-one interviews, group interviews. And we'll take all of that information back, and we'll synthesize it, and we'll come up with a roadmap and a strategy so that we can start to successfully move forward, hitting the right points as we go, the right milestones, and the right cadence. We map that out. And again, that's still just a conversation between us and the governance group, because from there you have to start talking about resourcing and everything, and really mobilizing the organization, which is where we get for the next step. which is engage.
And Jay, if I can just jump in real quick, but before we move on to the next step, engage,
Sure.
can you provide an example from one of the three buckets we've covered: governance, assessment, or strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go back to assessment. Kind of I touched on it a little bit where organizations will have a thought on what they think they need to do or what their people are feeling, and then they'll launch into their strategy. There are different scenarios that we typically walk into. One is where an organization says we don't really have anything. We have some grassroots that have kind of come from the ground up, and our employees are asking us to do better in this area. So we'll typically get calls from them. We'll get calls from people who have started down their journey and maybe they've gotten stuck. So we recently talked to an organization a couple of days ago where they've been trying to do all these things and they had some wonderful best practices, but as we kind of did a bit of a deep dive, they really didn't have a succinct strategy that they were using. And so in all of those situations, we go back to you have to listen to the individuals. And in one of the organizations we're working with where they made these assumptions, we went back and we did the survey, and the survey findings were much deeper in areas that they had no idea things that were happening or things that were being said or even policies that they had. For this particular one, there was a policy around maternity leave, where there really isn't a budget for maternity leave, and it falls to the frontline manager who has a very strict budget. And so that individual, not even really thinking about it, when they were hiring, they were avoiding hiring women because
Hmm.
they couldn't slow down on production. It was a sales organization, and they were like, I don't have the money to support, 8 weeks or however long their policy was. And so we found that, just through that information as an example, we needed to make policy changes. We needed to make sure that we took that barrier away. And so we created, organizational fund, right, for maternity leave, and we didn't put that burden on the frontline managers. So, that's an example of using that assessment. We never would have found that information had we not done the assessment, and that really would have created a misaligned strategy.
Jay, really appreciate you sharing that example with us. And as mentioned, we will take a deeper dive into the step by step process in episodes number 2 and 3.
Mhm.
Jay, do you mind touching on engage?
Yeah. So as part of the strategy, you not only want to think about the roadmap that you're going to do and the milestones and the activities that you're going to be doing, you also want to think about your communication strategy. How do you want to roll this out to your organization? Again, touching back to that assessment, you then have a temperature check for how is this going to be received in your organization? Are people already bought into it? Are there people that are going to be resistant to it? So on and so forth. So we also include that in with the strategy because that next step is to engage the organization. That's where you want to come back to the organization. You want to share. We always recommend you share the results, the high level results back from the assessment, how that led to your strategy, the importance of the DEI within the workplace, and the purpose and why you're doing this and why you're asking the organization to change. It's also a great opportunity to see who are those change agents within the organization. And that's something that we always seek out, or who are those individuals, no matter what level they're at, who are going to help support and influence people and throughout that piece. So that's really critical when you come to this engage, because that is when you're launching the program across the organization.
And after launching the program across the organization, Jay, learning and development is the next bucket. Can you touch on that?
Absolutely, yeah. So learning and development is key. We always start with unconscious bias. During that workshop, we go into a deep dive around what is diversity, equity, inclusion. It's interactive. We want to hear from people. We want to start to break down silos, and then we start talking about unconscious bias. I like to give. I'm a storyteller, so I love giving examples of my own biases, right, and how that's impacted negatively or positively decisions that I have made. But we always start with that workshop to get people engaged and just understanding and kind of open their minds. And then from there, depending on what we're trying to address, we have a whole learning cadence that goes behind that. of different workshops, different LMS, programs and things like that. So this is where you want to start to do the education piece for the organization.
And after doing that step, it looks like we have measure. Can you touch on measure for our audience, Jay?
Yeah. So as part of the strategy, one of the things that we'll start working on are the metrics that we want to look at, based on the strategy that we've put out there. Sometimes the hard piece for organizations and where we really help them is sometimes they're hard metrics. You want to have X amount of people in a leadership, or you want to have X percentage population, or things like that within a department, so on and so forth. Right? Those are strong measures, and Douglas, that's where they pick up the phone and probably call you, right? We want help in recruiting top talent into the organization here. So we'll usually do those types of metrics within the strategy. Some of them are a little softer. Some of them are around feelings of belonging, feelings of inclusion, and activities that we'll suss out later in another assessment and follow up. But the whole point is that those are established in the strategy, and we want to, as we go down the journey, we want to check in and make sure we have a regular cadence of checking in on how we're doing with those metrics. And they're all going to be different, depending on, this from your world, depending on, how much hiring are you going to do? How much turnover do you have? What is your opportunity to bring different people into the organization? That could be a 2-3 year strategy, but you're wanting to still see growth in that area, right? And so, some measures may make sense to check at the end of a year or quarterly, and some might be monthly. But this is where we want to make sure that as we're rolling things out, and we start to have that cultural shift within the organization, we want to check in and measure how are we doing, and what adjustments do we need to make.
And the last step in the process we have, Jay, is evolve.
Yeah. So this is really, from all of this, and I can't really put a particular time frame on it because it's different for each organization. But classically, I would say a year. At towards the end of a year, maybe kick something off at the beginning of the year, towards the fall. We're looking at our measurements and we're starting to make adjustments to the strategy, and we're starting to think about the next year, things that we've accomplished well and things that we need to continue to build on. And so really that's just that continual evolution of that plan. It's not going to be a static plan. Like I was saying earlier, some people will say, well, if I do unconscious bias in these trainings and things like that, we've opened a couple of employee resource groups. We're hiring, maybe we're trying to hire differently. Hey, we're done, right? It's like, no, we're talking about human beings, and we need to evolve the program along with our humans within the organization and our employees. So that's really the final step. And all of it then flows back constantly through that governance piece.
Jay, really appreciate you walking us through the DEI program development step-by-step process. Out of the last 4 buckets that we just discussed, where do you, well, I guess, do you have a strong example that you can share from one of the 4 buckets that would be beneficial for our viewers?
Yeah, I really think that it's that evolve piece. We had a client that we were working with, and we were going through this journey, and I think with that one it was about a year, and they said, okay, well, we think we've done a lot, and they had really moved the needle well. But one thing they didn't want to necessarily go back and do another full assessment, and they just basically wanted to stick with the strategy. And so with that group, we were done. At that point, they decided that the engagement was over, and they had what they needed to go from there. And just to say, ultimately, I do want to get every organization we work with. I want to get to that point where I've been blessed enough to say to people, you're there. The wheels are on. You're humming. You're running. And you have the experience now and the best practices to keep this going. But this organization necessarily wasn't, and so they missed out that step of evolve. And about 6 months later, they called us back, and unfortunately, a lot had derailed. The messages had gotten cloudy. The right individuals maybe weren't in place. Those change agents were starting to get upset because things stalled, things slowed down, and they felt like all of a sudden it was a check the box program. So we actually had to do almost double the work with that organization than had we just continued on a little bit more. And so I think that's a really critical piece of things.
Yeah, it sounds like from what you just described, Jay, the evolve aspect and bucket is really critical to the DEI program development process itself. And I know that you've done some really great work with the clients that you're retained with today. Can you share your approach emphasizing to executives that the DEI program development is a journey and not a sprint?
I will start that from day one in the conversation with them. And I will level set that, this isn't something where Jay is just trying to get more business. This is something there are so many organizations out there that are seeking help. This isn't a business pitch with them, right? It is genuine that, this is going to be a journey. And I also let them know we're gonna have setbacks. We're gonna have some unintended consequences that might pop up. But we bring so many best practices, and those are really minimized. And that is critical to make sure that you're following this process and that you're being guided. That's kind of goes back to our name, Pathfinder. We're Pathfinders for you, right? We want to continually make sure that you have this kind of unrestricted path in front of you for better success. And so, I would really say that's probably the best practice, and where I start with those business leaders is not only that business case, but right up front, this is going to be a journey. And I again, being a storyteller, I give them lots of examples of what's worked and what has not worked. And I think, a lot of times they understand that they don't want to do more damage than good. And so then they understand this is going to be, until we really truly feel we have a sustainable culture here.
Awesome. I think that's very valuable context and very appreciative for our viewers listening today. Um, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the direction of where you see diversity, equity, and inclusion is headed into 2023 and beyond.
Yeah, well, hopefully, those things that are keeping us up at night don't create barriers for us, because I've just been so blessed to see so many great organizations, do a great job in this, and see, the business side of things, right? That we kind of clicked back to before, not only the better business results, but lower turnover, happier employees, more engaged employees, and things like that. So, really, when I look at 2023, I really hope that people don't cut their business strategy, as part of their overall kind of strategic approach to maybe economic uncertainty and things like that. So I see this continuing to build. For my colleagues and myself, I will say that we all have talked about it's a little bit harder because of the divisive nature that started to come into the conversation. I do a lot of talks, and I'm starting to get more people kind of speaking out maybe a little aggressively in some of those talks. But the interesting about that is I completely welcome that, because for me, all of this is just a chance to have a dialogue and just understand. And the interesting thing about that is you start to get the audience talking to themselves, right? People will speak up against, or address, some comments are made, and 9 times out of 10, those individuals who may have been a little defensive or upset come to me at the end, and they're like, I think I get what you're talking about. And to me, like, that is an amazing, amazing conversation. So I say all that to say that I think that we're going to continue to see growth. We're going to continue to see the importance of this. We've got now 4 generations in the workforce, and when you listen to those generations, particularly the one that's entering the workforce now, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have.
Hmm.
There are, you talk to different, candidates out there, and, I stay very close to, the talent organization and recruiters and things like that. And they're all saying that culture and sustainability and corporate responsibility and DEI are critical for their decision to go from one company to another. And so it's a business case, for a lot of these organizations that they need to continue with this. And so I think 2023 will continue to see progress, hopefully both in corporations and in our cultural dialogue as a nation.
Yeah, as a whole, we're excited to head into 2023 and beyond. And Jay, just to wrap things up here, is there anything you'd like to share or talk about in terms of the work you're doing at Pathfinder Business Consultants today and or personally?
Yeah, absolutely. For Pathfinder, we have really been focused on those corporate and organizational engagements. We've got nonprofits too that we work with, or different groups that we'll work with. But one of the things that we found in our own journey as an organization is that I'll get a lot of phone calls from people that'll say, I we don't have a budget per se, like a big budget for bringing in a consultant and really being able to lean on you and your team, constantly for a long period of time. And I don't want those individuals to fall through the cracks. And so one of the things that we are building is actually very much based on this format, where we're going to be launching a platform where individuals can sign up for a series with us over a couple of weeks, where we'll share video. They'll watch a video, and then they'll have a live session with me and my team, or a couple of people from my network who are great thought leaders in particular areas, and we'll actually walk them through each one of these steps. And along the way, they'll fill out their own strategy that's customized to them and their needs for their organization. And so that then they can take that back and start to do the work themselves. And we also are going to be building a community with that. So a community where once you're in that program, you can talk amongst each other as a cohort. We'll be dropping information in there from the Pathfinder team, and also individuals from my network will be dropping in best practices and information where they can go and they can ask questions and things like that. So they're able to get that ongoing support, but at a rate that they can afford, because I don't want anybody to be missing out on this. And so that's a need that I think is out there, and that's something that we're going to be addressing early in 2023.
Well, it sounds like next year is going to be a super exciting year. So, Jay, I'm super pumped for you. Thanks again for your time today, and wishing your wife a happy early birthday and you and your family a happy holidays. Please tune in next week for part 2 of our Halo mini-series, Creating a Sustainable Culture of DEI.
Thanks, Doug.